addressing real issues. So if you look at, from a levies, you mentioned the AGR. Yeah, I mean, I do not believe it needs to be at 8%. I believe it can be significantly lower, significantly lower. It could be 2%, it could be 3% at the max. And then you take the spectrum usage charge as an example. People are bidding on spectrum at market price. Why should there be actually, I don't even know why you need a spectrum usage charge because you've already paid for it. Now, if there are administrative charges that need to be done, and there has to be maybe a 0.5%, maybe a 0.8% to take care of administrative things, then I think that's feasible. But at the same time, you don't want to go change the rules in retrospective because it's like saying you are taxed from 2014 for whatever you did in 2019. You don't want to do that because you want to be fair to the bidding process that happened at such a time. But going forward, what are the rules to be done in line with so that there is investments that is happening and promoting investments, encouraging investment? I think it's a great idea.
Mr. Balaji, you know, one of the things that I read while I was coming for this session was that Vodafone, Idea and Jio have been served notices for exaggerated credit claims under the GST. So what really happens in an industry which is in any case double taxed, you've got into a GST regime where taxes are higher, you know, will the national telecom policy have to look at this in a more holistic way? Or is this how businesses are going to be? Because, you know, you're in essential services, you're moving towards, you know, it has been brought in the GST, and still there seems to be this, how do I say, the magnum opus of taxation all around you.
No, so I think I wouldn't talk about a specific issue other than to say that I know the industry as a whole is extremely conscious about of being responsible corporate citizen. That's really, I would say that for all the companies that you mentioned specifically. So that is not the issue in terms of taxation. We are proud as an industry for the amount of taxes that we've actually contributed, and it's also our beholden duty. There's a time for relook at what needs to be done going forward. I think the investable surpluses need to go up significantly for all the challenges that you have in terms of rolling out new sites, new technology obsolescence, upgradation, new services, and so on. And in that context, clearly a simple way of kind of looking at telecom revenues as a means to kind of tax and then having a simple way of kind of dealing with it and a rational way of dealing with it would be good. In fact, we are very gratified that the government actually has been saying that telecom industry is going to actually pave the way for Digital India from being an infrastructure essential requirement for the same. And so we're kind of quite enthused that this policy is coming at the right time.
But Rajan, you know, this policy is also coming at a time, National Telecom Policy 2018, where the industry, the stakeholders, the ecosystem have in their minds and otherwise also moved beyond mobile telephony as a voice service. It's all about data. Everybody is talking about videos that will be 90% by 20. You know, that's the kind of statistics that's been spoken about. Given this new reality and given the change that the industry is seeing, how do you expect this policy to address that concern? And I'll talk about data in more detail in just a bit.
So I think just to take off from what Akhil said and what
Sure.
Matthew said, I mean, what's your policy? Because what is underneath really is to support the policy. You have these really great ideas, you know, connect the next 1 billion, roll out 5G, give speeds of 2 Mbps, you know, even that's, you know, moving from, you know, 512 kbps, you know, all of these really great, put India on the map in terms of innovation. And then you ask yourself, who's going to get it done? The government is not saying we will because it's been privatized. So it's 100% in the realm of the private industry to come up with the resources to meet these policy objectives. And that's why we continue to harp on saying, if you don't fix the issue of how much surplus, to use Balaji's term, or how much profitability, you're just not going to get there. So aspirations are good, but the execution to get to aspiration fulfillment is equally important.
And as a policymaker, Mr. Gupta, it's only fair that I ask you that spectrum reforms have happened. I think everybody on this panel and otherwise will agree that there have been spectrum reforms, you know, caps have been liberalized and all of that. but they have happened in a very piecemeal way, and they have happened in a reaction to market dynamics changing. They haven't been proactive, they haven't happened because the industry was going through a certain phase. It has happened because market dynamics forced the government and policymakers to do so. Now, as the new telecom policy 2018 comes up, does it entail an entire overhaul, an entire relook at how spectrum has been treated, not just by the industry, but by the government and the policymakers themselves? I mean, everybody speaks about contiguous spectrum, not discretionary. People are talking about why have a reserve price? When there are these 3 or 4 big players in the market, why not leave it to market forces to determine prices?
I think before I particularly answer this question of the spectrum, I would like to just briefly touch upon that at what point we are here and why National Telecom Policy 18, which is likely to come, becomes very, very important. If you look at the journey of the telecommunication, in 1997-98, there was no sort of connection and there was no player, so therefore liberalization was started. When we reached out 2006, there was the issue that even voice communication was very liberal, not available to the many of the people. So there was need to increase the voice communication and devices. In 2012, we wanted multimedia services to be grown out. But when we are sitting on 2018, it is basically we are starting, or rather we have entered to the revolution of the data services.
Fair point. Mr. Gupta, I'll direct this question to you. I mean, you know, as a young journalist, I think 15 years back, I wrote the line and continue to write it, that spectrum is the lifeline of mobile telephony, continues to be. Are you, A, satisfied with the government's approach of trying to treat the spectrum differently in National Telecom Policy 2018? And B, just to be the devil's advocate, one of the things that's said against the industry is that the government fears that if the reserve price were to go, there would be cartelization and they will not be able to discover prices. Do you believe the market has now matured to the extent where you can put up your hand and say, we are sure nothing like that will happen? And if it does, let's get the monopoly regulator in and sort out matters. Let's not have reserve prices.
Well, first of all, to your earlier comment that the spectrum availability policy has been a reaction rather than proactive stuff. I'm a little sympathetic to that because that's how industry develops. There's always a reaction to how an industry evolves. So nothing wrong in that. The great job done is on harmonization. I think that's a great job. Coming to auctions, well, the fact is, it was the problem of 14 players. But in a democracy, how else do you give a scarce resource is something we would love to see. Mr. Gupta said that they are looking at it in a different manner. We would love to see that the existing players are just given these new spectrum requirements at a price which need not be zero, but which reflect the new reality of this world.
Matthew, coming to you, what sort of a policy would you want to see as far as spectrum treatment is concerned? I mean, you know, operators have said, and we'll talk about 5G in just a bit, but, you know, contiguous spectrum is required. And you know, the other point is, why have reserve price when we can discover a market price without cartelization and all of that? So now that Akhil has made this disclaimer that you're not always fighting and you agree, do you essentially agree on that point?
First of all, I do echo everything Akhil said, and I think, and I appreciate what he said. All the more, before I answer that question, need to also talk about what Mr. Gupta from TRI said. First, I've never met this gentleman before, and it's great to visit with him in, you know, over here. So, but the way he articulated the problem and the opportunity that we have a nation, and how he has framed the building blocks that is required to take us, I'm impressed, sir. Thank you. I think that baseline would indeed lay the right foundation. With respect to reserve price, personally, I agree with the perspective that both of them made in terms of, I don't think you need a very high price for the spectrums going forward because the market is mature. It can be a reasonable and fair price. The reasonable and fair price meaning so that folks do have additional capital to operationalize that spectrum and realize India's 5G objectives and dreams.
Mr. Gupta, you know, we are talking about the future technologies. It's only fair I talked about 5G. Mr. Akhil Gupta said that everybody at GSMA this time was talking about 5G and it's going to be a reality, commercial launches in the US and China. Is India ready for a 5G market? I mean, you know, I was speaking to some experts and they said that will entail a tower being erected at every 30, 40 meters, will require 1 million towers. Are we ready for a technology like that at all?
I would say yes, definitely we are ready for the technology, and maybe that this time we will be the leaders of the technology, not the followers all the time that we have been. Now let us see, 2-3 things are very, very important. First of all, when we talk about the 5G, what 5G at all looks like. One is to connect too many systems or the small devices to talk to each other, that is we call the IoT. Second thing is that you provide the very high type of the bandwidth for users. As you say that 90% of the data will be of the video, so how to take care of that. And third is that very ultra sensitive sort of low latency applications which we had to give. If all these things has to be given, we had to enhance the fiberization, as have been mentioned by him. Right-of-way policy will be important, but at the same time, not only right-of-way policy will be important, but there has to be ready infrastructure which are to be shared between the service provider where they can provide it. Because coverage required will be very high, and if you have to provide those sort of coverage requirement, then you have to have the duct system or something else which is ready to use. Whenever any service provider want to use, it can use it, or there is a fiber which can be shared. So we had to move on to some different framework where infrastructure availability has to be enhanced and made available for the service providers where they can provide services. And I'm very confident that by 2020 or maybe 2022, between 2020 and 2022, we'll be able to provide the 5G services and we are ready for it. Thank you.
So we are ready to provide 5G services, but is there a business case for it? I mean, the examples that are often quoted are from very developed markets. I mean, driverless cars in the US, all right, but are we going to see any driverless car outside this hotel in Delhi?
Look, I don't think we should turn 5G into a monster or a fashion statement. 5G is a natural evolution of mobile technology. 2G came, 3G came, 3.5G came, H technology came, 4G came, 5G will also come. Therefore, we don't need to worry too much whether we are number one to adopt it. We will never be. They are being adopted elsewhere. What we need to do is adopt it when the standards have been completely set. Today, 5G standards in terms of spectrum and other things are not yet set. Let's wait for that. The good thing this time is India is not waiting in the wings. We are a part of that whole ecosystem and negotiations and deliberations which are happening at the world stage. Therefore, the time lag this time for India to adopt 5G will be small. Coming to the business case, well, I think the whole world today is thinking about what business case to be there. One, obviously the customers need higher speed. They will consume more, therefore there is a business case.
Come to you, Jim Cathy. For 5G to be a reality or for us to leapfrog with our infrastructure, which needs to change in the next 12 to 18 months, it has to be about unbundling of services. It has to be about sharing. No operator can really do it on its own. The business dynamics don't permit it. Do you believe Indian Telecom and the policy needs to make its peace and make way for that sharing as well?
I think, you know, when you look at 5G, Qualcomm's working with over 18 carriers globally to make sure that actually the first implementations happen in 2019. The thing you want to pull from this is, it's not so much what we're doing. Yeah, you want to wait for the standards, I agree with that. But the interesting thing is that India has already proven there's a business case for 5G. It did an excellent job showing that there's massive demand for data. And if there's big demand for data, it automatically forces the carriers to start working on driving the cost down per bit. That's one reason why you see consolidation. You've got to drive the cost down because it becomes more of a commodity. Well, if there's massive demand for data, you drive the cost down with a bigger pipe. Bigger pipe means 5G. So you can see it coming your direction. I think it's sooner than people predict, and I've said this years ago, that as India migrates to the LTE and the massive MIMO and does the bridge to 5G, we're going to see 5G here sooner than people ever predicted, because you've already proven it. There's big data demand, and you must drive the cost down to service that market.
You know, talking about costs, I think I'm tempted to ask Rajan Matthew this question. Ideally, this question should be going to the way of Mr. Gupta and Mr. Oman, but I'll ask you, and actually Balaji, I'll ask you this question. People say your ARPUs are $3 to $4, and you are offering 30 GB of data. How long is this going to be sustainable? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Not on the viability of the industry or the sustainability and all of that, because national telecom policy will have to marry competitiveness vis-a-vis sustainability. When does this stop? I mean, this has to stop at some stage because your investments have to be driven up. I mean, a market like China is investing $80 billion a year. We're obviously not doing that. Korea invests $15, you know, $30 billion a year. We're not doing that. At some stage, and you know, we say that irrationality has gone, the carnage has gone, we are back to sound business. But when will this madness stop? This is not sustainable, is it?
I think you're absolutely right. It's not sustainable in terms of the profile of the industry. Now, just to give you a few data points, Supriya, first of all, we pay 30% more in terms of every megahertz of spectrum, right, in terms of global standards. We pay global prices for our network, right? Between the two of them, that's probably about 70% of all of the necessary investments, right? And look at the ARPU, right? Global average is about $75 US. We, $3. Right, so this is the stark profile of what's required. And so to continue to say that we'll have a race to the bottom simply is not going to get us there in terms of what the policy is demanding of what the operators have to deliver. It's just not there. And so I'll just give you a data point again. The EU Commission is here, right? The ITC Commission is here dealing with the government. You know what's on top of the agenda? They're saying is that we've got to make operators profitable again for us to be able to roll out 5G and make our countries digital ready. They're saying is that this issue of the consumer continuing to have oodles of GBs and all of that's fine, but they've gotten to the stage where they're saying is that their programs are at risk because operators simply don't have the financial incentives anymore to invest.
Mr. Gupta, I want to ask you a specific question. Do you believe the regulator or the government, from a policy-making point of view, has let this happen at the cost of investments in the sector? I mean, if ARPUs are going to be so low and if tariffs are going to be so rock bottom and you are going to let that continue, which it has in Indian telecom, it's eventually going to impact investments. I mean, who will have the pockets, the wherewithal to invest? So, you know, in hindsight, do you believe that has happened? And does NTP 2018 need to correct that?
I think I'd like to get your attention back to 2004, where we have given forbearance in the tariff. And TRAI has never fixed any tariff like it should be less than $3 or $2 or $1.
But as a regulator and as a policymaker, doesn't the sustainability of an operator or operators also be a part of policy? That's all I'm asking.
Let me complete. If I touch upon certain data points, once the uses or rather the price per GB was reduced, the acceptability or the utility of that particular data has drastically driven out. And as of today, if you see that every subscriber, even if it is using data or not using data, the average comes out to be about 2 GB what they are using. And if you see the people who are using 4G, it's more than 11 GB what they are using to. And number of subscribers in India is 1.2 billion. Now, let us not forget these figures. So, I am very sure about it that situation is not as bad as one can think of, that everything has gone bad and therefore there has to be a large interventions required to correct the situation on the pricing. However, there are certain policy issues which I have mentioned earlier, that going forward we have to address those policy issues so that sharing of infrastructure can be enhanced, pricing is reduced, and network utilization can be enhanced so that the average drain out on the service providers to provide a particular service is reduced. Thank you.
All right, you made a clarion. Okay, I think too many people on this panel. I have a last question for Dr. Mariman, but okay, go ahead, very quickly.
And I'll take it after.
Sure, okay then. I told you we'll get them to fight. I have. Go ahead.
No, just saying is that, there is an issue of irrational exuberance, right? We all recognize this in markets, right? In highly competitive markets, and that's why the regulator is there, right? And that's why we say, look, what does the regulator's role probably mean in these environments?
Forbearance is all right, but there's something called viability of business models as well. Go ahead.
Level playing field is critical, needs to be the bedrock of anything that is done. Therefore, when we say same service, same rules, when we talk about allowing unshackled competition and not kind of putting restrictions on licensees versus non-licensed players. Those are equally important in my view. And if you did that, then it will structurally then provide the right kind of framework to ensure that you allow for everyone to have an equal chance in this market environment to be successful.
So one not so politically correct contention, one politically correct, but it's all directed at you.
Not a problem, actually, because we are doing what the market needs, what we call as rational pricing. I don't know if rational pricing is called low ARPU, high ARPU, because what happens is, if you have antiquated technologies, and if you have antiquated business models, and you have high inefficiencies, your cost of doing business will get disrupted, your businesses will get disrupted. No industry can look to the regulator, no industry can look to the government and say, save my day, because any industry has to work with market forces. So I think it is about business model. I think it is not just about one parameter. There are various parameters that has to be looked at. It has to be looked at holistically, and it cannot be looked at as a particular point and harp on that particular point, because I think India needed it. India is not the United States of America. India cannot afford $40, $50. India can only afford. That is why Indians are able to use 100 MB to 4 GB, and yet companies that have different business models able to have EBITDA as well as profits.
All right. I don't know if Akhil Gupta wants to respond to that, and if he does, I'll give
What
up
I want to respond is, I know there's grave provocation from this side. This side, I'm not going to get into that, because I guess
I'm just doing a good job.
I'm too seasoned to be drawn into that. One thing I want to definitely say, when in this industry the companies were very profitable, nicely profitable, it would have been stupid for us to say, we alone did it. This success has been possible because of the government policies, the government support, and something that we have done right. Conversely, when things go bad, it will be stupid on part of the industry to say the entire blame lies on the footsteps of TRAI. Or for the government to say, oh, we couldn't care. It went bad, we had nothing to see. Mr. Gupta talked about the forbearance in tariffs. But one thing which needs to be kept in mind is that with that forbearance, it was always kept as a power that TRAI could intervene when it deemed necessary. Unfortunately, the mindset was that the only necessary part can be if the customer is being charged too much. But let's not get into that. My simple submission is, it would take always an industry like this two to tango. The private sector as well as the regulator and the government. And we could have our differences of opinion, but that is the harsh reality. Just one quick minute on your other question, how long will it last? That's important.
That's true.
So I won't say it depends on Matthew now, but I would say the most important thing to me is the industry structure should be right. And after a long time, forget the reasons how it happened, at what cost has happened.
The sanity.
The industry structure is absolutely right, which means that it's a matter of time that this industry will turn back to profitability. There would be definitely at some point some increase in tariffs or in the size of the ARPU of the packs. It will come back to profitability.
I think on that note, I will thank this wonderful panel for keeping the discussion alive. It's my job as a moderator to provoke, but I think like in telecom, sanity returned to our panel as well. So thanks to each one of you for participating, and thanks for being a lovely audience.